It was one of those slow, cloudy afternoons when the streets were empty and the air smelled of wet leaves. A small cafe sat at the corner of a quiet street. The paint on its wooden door had started to peel, and the old signboard creaked softly every time the wind passed through. Inside, a few regular customers sat in their usual spots, sipping coffee and chatting about ordinary things. The sound of spoons tapping against cups mixed with the hum of a broken ceiling fan. In one corner of the cafe stood a piano. It was covered with a thin layer of dust, and a small vase with plastic flowers sat on top of it. Most people didn't even notice it anymore. That piano had been there for years, untouched, forgotten like an old photograph. The cafe owner used to say that a traveler had left it behind long ago and never came back for it. It was slightly out of tune, and no one ever dared to play it because they believed it had lost its voice. But that day, something unexpected happened. Something that would soon change not just the quiet cafe, but the lives of many who witnessed what followed. The door opened with a soft jingle of the bell, and a young woman stepped in. She looked a bit tired. Her clothes simple, her shoes slightly wet from the rain. She carried a small, worn-out notebook tucked under her arm. She moved quietly, as if she didn't want to disturb anyone, and chose a seat near the window. The owner, an older man with kind eyes and a bit of gray in his hair, walked over and asked what she'd like to order. She smiled politely and asked for tea. Her voice was gentle, but there was something in her tone, a kind of heaviness that only comes from people who have carried silence for too long. As she waited, her eyes wandered across the cafe and stopped at the piano. For a long moment, she just looked at it. Her expression softened, almost like she was remembering something far away. The owner noticed her gaze and chuckled softly. "You can try it if you want," he said, half joking. "No one's played it in years. It might sound like a broken drum." A few of the customers laughed. She smiled shyly but didn't say anything. She simply looked down at her notebook and sipped her tea quietly. Minutes passed. The rain grew heavier outside, tapping gently against the glass windows. The soft sound of raindrops filled the space between small conversations. The young woman finished her tea, still glancing at the piano now and then. Something in her seemed to pull toward it, a feeling she was trying to resist. But that kind of pull is hard to ignore when it comes from the heart. Finally, she stood up slowly and walked over to the piano. A few people looked up surprised. The owner raised his eyebrows and smiled, as if he hadn't really expected her to take his offer seriously. She placed her hand gently on the piano lid, brushing away the thin layer of dust. For a moment, she just stood there, her reflection faintly visible on the glossy wood. Then she opened the lid and the keys greeted her, some yellowed with age, some slightly chipped but still waiting to be touched. She took a deep breath and sat down on the wooden stool. Her hands trembled slightly as she placed them over the keys. She didn't play right away. Instead, she just closed her eyes as if she was trying to listen to something inside herself before letting it out. The cafe grew unusually quiet. The rain, the fan, the soft clinking of cups, and everything seemed to fade. And then she pressed the first note. It was soft and slightly out of tune, but there was something honest in it. Then another note followed, and another. Slowly, a melody began to form. It wasn't perfect. The piano's old keys creaked a little, but the music carried a feeling that made everyone stop what they were doing. At first, it was a slow, uncertain rhythm, like the sound of a heart learning to beat again, but then it started to grow. Her fingers began to move with confidence, dancing across the keys as if they had found their home after a long time. The notes filled the cafe with warmth. The owner leaned on the counter, stunned. One of the customers, an elderly woman who came every morning for tea, closed her eyes and smiled. Another man near the door lowered his phone and simply listened. No one spoke. No one moved. The music had taken over. The melody changed, soft in some moments, powerful in others. It was as if she was telling a story without words. There was sorrow, there was longing, and then there was hope. Each note carried an emotion so deep that even the creaky old piano seemed to come alive. People who had walked in that day just to pass time now found themselves holding their breath. Some had tears forming in their eyes without knowing why. As she played, her mind traveled back to the years she had tried so hard to forget. There was a time when music was her whole world. She had once been a promising student at a small music conservatory. She had dreams of performing on big stages, of composing her own songs. But life has a way of interrupting dreams. Her mother had fallen ill suddenly, and with bills piling up, she had to leave her studies and take whatever job she could find. The music notebook she once filled with melodies turned into pages of unpaid expenses and reminders. For a while, she stopped playing altogether. It hurt too much to touch the keys that reminded her of what she'd lost, but she never stopped hearing music inside her. Every time she walked past a piano, she felt it call to her, softly, almost whispering. Still, she kept walking. She convinced herself it was too late, that maybe some dreams aren't meant to be lived. Until that rainy afternoon, when a joke from a cafe owner and the sound of rain gave her a reason to sit down again. Her fingers moved faster now, each motion full of life. She poured every memory, every unspoken word into the piano. The cafe seemed to hold its breath as though even the walls were listening. The melody shifted again. It became brighter, rising with energy, like sunlight breaking through clouds after a storm. It was no longer just sadness. It was release, a kind of freedom she hadn't felt in years. It was as if she was letting go of all the pain she had carried quietly inside her. When the last note faded, there was silence. A deep, heavy silence that lasted for a few seconds before the sound of clapping filled the room. People stood up, applauding, some still wiping their eyes. The owner looked speechless. The young woman smiled shyly, her face turning a little red. She quickly stood, bowed her head slightly, and closed the piano lid. She didn't say a word, but her eyes glistened softly under the cafe lights. One of the customers whispered, "Who is she?" Another replied, "I've never seen her before." The owner finally managed to speak. "That was incredible. You've brought this place back to life." She smiled again, murmured a quiet thank you, and reached for her notebook. It was old, its cover bent at the edges, filled with pages of handwritten notes and music sheets. She tucked it under her arm and walked toward the door. The rain had stopped outside, and a soft glow from the streetlight made the puddles shine like glass. She turned once, looked at the piano, and smiled faintly, a smile of quiet peace before stepping out. As the door closed behind her, everyone seemed to exhale. The cafe owner walked up to the piano and placed his hand on it, as if trying to feel the warmth that still lingered from her touch. "Would you believe that?" he said to one of the regulars. "That thing hasn't sounded that beautiful in years." The old woman nodded. "That girl has a story," she said softly. You could hear it in her music. Later that night, when the cafe was empty, the owner's teenage son came downstairs with his phone. "Dad," he said, "I recorded the whole thing. Should I post it online?" The owner hesitated. "Would she want that?" he asked. His son shrugged. "I don't know. But people should hear this. It's too beautiful to stay here." The man thought for a while, then nodded slowly. "All right, but post it without her name. Just call it something simple." So the boy uploaded the video with the title, "Unknown Pianist Brings a Cafe to Tears." By morning, the world began to notice. People across the internet shared it, commented on it, talked about it. Some said the melody reminded them of their childhood. Others said it helped them cry for the first time in years. The video started spreading faster than anyone expected. But the young woman didn't know any of it yet. She was already on a bus that morning, heading to another part of town to deliver flowers for her part-time job. Her phone buzzed a few times, but she ignored it. She didn't have time for social media, and besides, she didn't think anything about her little performance. To her, it had just been a moment, a quiet way to say goodbye to something she loved. Back at the cafe, customers started coming in asking about the pianist. The owner smiled and said she just came in, played, and left. Didn't even tell me her name. Soon reporters began calling. The small cafe, which used to have slow afternoons and empty tables, suddenly became busy. People wanted to see the piano where it all happened. Some even asked if they could play it, but the owner refused. "Not yet," he said. "It still belongs to her even if she doesn't know it." Meanwhile, in her small apartment that night, the young woman opened her old music notebook and stared at the pages filled with notes she had written years ago. She ran her fingers gently over them, remembering the days when every note had meaning. She sighed softly, not knowing that somewhere across the world, thousands of people were listening to her melody, calling it a masterpiece born from the soul. The piano in that cafe, once forgotten, had woken up. And so had she, even if she didn't realize it yet. Outside, the rain started again, tapping softly on her window. She closed her eyes, listening. Somewhere deep inside, the melody began to play again. Not from the piano this time, but from her heart. And for the first time in a long while, she smiled, unaware that her simple act of courage that afternoon had just begun to change her life forever. The next few days passed quietly for her. She went about her work as usual, delivering flowers, helping customers pick bouquets, and taking care of small plants in the corner of the shop. She liked her job because it was peaceful and didn't require much talking. The smell of fresh flowers always comforted her, and she often hummed softly while arranging them. Yet somewhere deep inside she still felt something unusual, something she couldn't quite explain. It was as if a door inside her heart had opened after years of being locked. That moment in the cafe kept coming back to her. The feeling of her fingers touching the keys, the sound of the music filling the room, the warmth of the people's eyes when they listened. It all stayed with her. She hadn't felt that alive in years. Every time she remembered it, she smiled a little, though she didn't understand why it made her both happy and sad. She didn't know that the whole world had started to listen to that same moment too. The video had gone viral. People were sharing it everywhere. Some said it was the most touching piano performance they had ever heard. Others said they could feel pain and hope in the same melody. Messages poured in from different countries asking, "Who is this woman? And where can we hear more from her?" In the small cafe, things had changed overnight. The owner, who had spent years waiting for customers to fill the empty chairs, suddenly had lines of people outside. Some wanted coffee, but most wanted to see the piano. Journalists came with cameras. The owner's son, who had uploaded the video, couldn't believe it. He watched the view count climb higher every hour. People came from nearby towns asking if the pianist would return. But she didn't. No one knew who she was, and the cafe owner could only shrug when they asked. She just walked in, played, and left, he would say again and again. Didn't even tell us her name. In another part of the city, she was sitting by her window late one night watching the rain. The little notebook lay open on her table. It had a few new notes scribbled on one of the pages, fragments of a melody she had started to compose. She had picked up her pencil again after so long, not because she planned to perform, but because the music inside her refused to stay quiet anymore. Her phone vibrated. It was a message from a friend she hadn't spoken to in years. "Is that you in the cafe video?" the message said, followed by a link. She frowned and clicked it. For a moment her heart stopped. The screen showed her sitting at the piano, her hands moving gently over the keys, her head slightly tilted in concentration. The caption read, "Unknown pianist brings a cafe to tears." The view count was in the millions. Comments flooded the page. People were writing things like, "I can feel her pain in every note. Whoever she is, she plays from her soul. This is real music. It speaks even without words." She stared at the screen in disbelief. Her chest felt tight, not from fear, but from shock. She had never imagined something like this could happen. That small, quiet moment, and something she thought would be forgotten, had reached millions. She didn't know whether to be proud or frightened. The next day at work, she couldn't focus. Her coworker noticed her unusual quietness. "Are you okay?" they asked. She nodded and smiled faintly, but her mind was somewhere else. Every few hours, she checked the video again, watching the comments grow. Some people said her music had helped them heal. One comment said, "I was in the hospital when I heard this video. It gave me strength." Another read, "I lost my mother last year, and this piece reminded me of her." She read those words again and again, her eyes filling with tears. She realized something. The music she played that day wasn't just about her pain. It was about everyone's pain, everyone's hope. Meanwhile, the cafe owner received a call from a news station. They wanted to feature his cafe and the story behind the mysterious pianist. He agreed, hoping that maybe she'd see it and return. When the camera crew came, they filmed the piano, the dusty vase still on top, and asked the owner to describe what happened. He smiled as he spoke, his voice full of wonder. "I've had this piano for years," he said. "It was silent for so long, but that day it came alive again. And so did we." The story aired on local television that week. People watched and listened. Even those who didn't care about music found themselves touched by the story. It wasn't about fame or skill. It was about something pure, something that reached the heart. That night, as she was locking up the flower shop, an elderly man came in just before closing. He bought a small bouquet of white lilies. "I saw that video," he said softly as she handed him the flowers. You play beautifully, her hands froze. You recognize me? She asked in surprise. He smiled kindly. I don't forget faces that bring me peace. Then he thanked her and left, leaving her standing there speechless. She realized then that hiding was becoming impossible. The world had already found her without even knowing her name. Days passed. She continued her routine, but something inside her kept changing. She started playing again in her small apartment. The piano there was cheap and slightly uneven, but she didn't care. Every night after work, she'd sit down and play softly, letting her fingers wander until the world outside disappeared. Sometimes, she'd cry while playing, not because she was sad, but because it felt like she was finally coming home. One evening as she played, her phone rang. She ignored it at first, but it kept buzzing. When she finally answered, a polite voice introduced themselves. We're from a music foundation, the person said. We saw your video. Would you consider performing at one of our charity events? Her heart skipped a beat. I think you've got the wrong person, she said quickly. I'm not a performer, I just played once. The voice was gentle but firm. That's exactly why people want to hear you. You play with truth, not perfection. That's rare. She didn't know what to say. She thanked them and said she'd think about it. But after hanging up, she sat quietly for a long time. Could she really do it again? Could she face people, lights, cameras? The thought made her nervous. But at the same time, there was a small spark of excitement deep inside her. The same spark she used to feel before every recital in her old music school. That night, she couldn't sleep. She turned on the video again, watched herself sitting at that old cafe piano and listened to the melody. It didn't feel like just a recording anymore. It felt like a message, one that had found its way back to her. The next morning, she went back to the cafe. The bell above the door jingled softly as she entered. The owner looked up, shocked for a moment, then broke into a huge smile. You're back, he exclaimed. She smiled nervously. I saw the video, she said quietly. I didn't expect any of this. The owner nodded. None of us did. But you've given something beautiful to people. They come here every day now asking about you. Some even cry when they see the piano. She looked at it again, the same old instrument sitting quietly in the corner. The vase was gone now and the piano looked cleaner, almost proud. She walked over and touched it gently. It feels different, she whispered. It is different, the owner said. It remembers you. She smiled faintly, then turned to him. Would it be all right if I played again? Of course, he said instantly. Anytime you want. She sat down and began to play. This time the melody was lighter, softer, full of warmth and gratitude. The customers who were there stopped to listen again, some recognizing her immediately. Someone took out their phone and recorded a short clip, but she didn't mind. For the first time, she didn't feel scared. She felt free. When she finished, the cafe filled with quiet applause once more. A few people thanked her personally, saying her music had touched their hearts. One woman said, My son listens to your video every night before bed. He says it makes his dreams peaceful. That simple sentence made her tear up. The cafe owner poured her a cup of tea. So, he said with a smile, are you going to keep hiding from the world? She laughed softly. Maybe not forever, she said. But I'm not sure I'm ready for stages and lights. He nodded. You'll know when the time is right. Music like yours finds its own path. Over the next few weeks, life slowly began to change again. The foundation representative called her again, and this time she agreed to meet. They talked about hosting a small charity concert. Not something big, just an event to raise money for children in hospitals. The idea moved her. She remembered her mother, who had spent months in a hospital bed, smiling through pain. The thought that her music could help someone else brought her comfort. She agreed to perform. In the evenings, she practiced quietly, working on new pieces. Her fingers had grown stronger again. Each note she played felt like healing. Sometimes she'd stop and just sit in silence, thinking about everything that had led her here. Her struggles, her mother, that rainy day in the cafe. The night before the concert, she couldn't sleep. She sat by her window again, looking out at the streetlights reflected in the puddles. She opened her notebook and wrote one sentence on the last page. Maybe music isn't about being heard. Maybe it's about being felt. When the morning came, she stood in front of the small community hall where the event would take place. The seats inside weren't many, but the people waiting to hear her were genuine. Families, children, nurses, and volunteers. She took a deep breath before walking in. The foundation director greeted her warmly. "We're honored you're here," they said. "Don't worry about anything. Just play from your heart." She nodded, her palms slightly sweaty, her heart racing. But as she sat down at the piano on that small stage, something shifted. It wasn't fear anymore, and it was peace. The same kind of peace she had felt in that cafe when the world had gone silent. She closed her eyes and began to play. The melody flowed softly at first, then grew with quiet strength. People in the audience closed their eyes, feeling every note. The music filled the room like sunlight, gentle, warm, and real. When she finished, there was silence again, followed by applause that felt endless. Tears rolled down her cheeks, but this time, they weren't from pain. They were from gratitude. She stood, bowed slightly, and smiled. Later that night, she walked home under the stars. Her notebook was tucked under her arm again, just like that first day. But now it wasn't a symbol of lost dreams, and it was a map leading her forward. She had rediscovered her purpose, not for fame, not for attention, but for love. Love for music, love for people, and love for the memories that made her who she was. She didn't know what would come next. Maybe more performances, maybe more recordings. But for now, she was simply content. The unknown pianist who once played in a small cafe had found her place again, not on a grand stage, but in the hearts of those who needed her sound the most. And though she didn't realize it yet, her story was far from over. The melody she had shared was just beginning to reach places she could never have imagined. After the charity concert, everything changed quietly, without noise or celebration. She went home that night with a calm heart, the applause still echoing softly in her mind. It wasn't the kind of applause that feeds the ego. It was gentle, honest, and full of gratitude. The sound of it made her realize something deep. She didn't need a big stage to matter. Music itself had always been her home, and that night she had finally walked through its door again. The following morning she woke up early, opened her window, and let the cold air in. The city was slowly coming to life. Vendors setting up stalls, school buses passing by, birds landing on the wires outside. It all looked ordinary, yet it felt different. For the first time in years, she felt like her life had a rhythm again. She sat at her small piano, the one she had bought secondhand years ago, and began playing softly. It wasn't a song from her notebook, just something that came naturally, like a conversation with her own heart. She didn't notice that her neighbor, an older woman who lived across the hallway, was listening through the slightly open door. After she finished, there was a gentle knock. When she opened the door, the woman smiled. "You play beautifully," she said. "Every morning I wait for your music. It makes my tea taste sweeter." They both laughed softly. It was a small thing, but it warmed her heart. She hadn't realized how much her music could quietly touch people, even those who lived only a few steps away. That day at work, her phone buzzed with messages again. The charity event had been recorded and posted online by someone from the audience. The video was already gaining attention, and people were saying, "She's back," and the unknown pianist has returned. She read the comments slowly, her eyes soft but unsure. She didn't know whether she wanted the attention or not. Fame wasn't something she was chasing. What she wanted was peace, the feeling of connecting with others through something real. But life had its own plans. A few days later, she received an email from a well-known music producer. His message was short but sincere. He said he had watched both of her videos, the cafe performance and the charity concert, and he was moved by the honesty in her music. He asked if she would meet him for coffee to talk about working together. She hesitated for hours before replying. She had never met anyone from the industry before, and part of her still doubted herself. But curiosity, and maybe a quiet hope, made her agree. They met at a small book cafe downtown. He arrived first, wearing a simple jacket and carrying a folder of notes. When she walked in, he stood up and smiled warmly. "I'm really glad you came," he said. "I've been waiting to meet the person behind that sound." She sat across from him, nervous but polite. He told her how rare it was to find someone who played with such depth. "Nowadays," he said, "people focus so much on perfection that they forget about emotion. Your music isn't flawless, but that's what makes it human. It breathes." His words caught her off guard. She wasn't used to praise, especially from someone who worked with professionals. He continued, "I think your story, the cafe, the video, the charity event, it's something people need right now. Would you consider recording a few pieces? Maybe an album based on your journey?" She didn't answer right away. She stirred her coffee and looked out the window, thinking about how strange life could be. Just months ago, she was hiding from her own dreams, and now, someone was asking her to share them with the world. "I don't know," she said quietly. "I'm not sure I'm ready for all that." The producer smiled understandingly. "You don't have to decide now. Just know that your gift deserves to be heard, not for fame, but because it brings light to others." They talked for over an hour, not just about music, but about life, about losing direction, about finding meaning in small things, about the power of sound to heal. When she left that cafe, she felt lighter. Maybe she wasn't ready to record an album yet, but she was ready to believe in herself again. That night, she sat at her piano once more. She opened her old notebook, the one that had traveled with her through everything, and began adding new pages. She wrote a piece she called Awakening. It started slow, almost hesitant, then bloomed into something bright and full of life. When she finished, she smiled through tears. It was the first new song she had written in years. The next morning, she decided to visit the cafe again. The owner greeted her with a big grin. "You're famous now," he joked. "I should charge an entry fee just for people to see your piano." She laughed and shook her head. "It's not my piano," she said softly. "It belongs to everyone who listens." She sat down and played her new piece for him. The sound filled the cafe once again, bringing back memories of that first rainy afternoon. When she finished, he clapped and said, "That's the sound of someone who's found her way back." News of her return spread fast. More people began visiting the cafe, hoping to catch her playing again. She didn't play every day, only when her heart felt ready. Each time she did, the cafe filled with a kind of quiet joy that words couldn't describe. People didn't talk much while she played. They just listened, letting the notes speak for them. Meanwhile, the producer she had met kept in touch. He didn't pressure her, only encouraged her to keep playing and recording small clips at home. One evening, he called and said, "There's something I think you should see." He sent her a link. It was a short documentary someone had made about her, about the unknown pianist who reminded the world of the power of music. It showed clips of the cafe, the charity concert, and comments from people around the world. One man from Japan said her music helped him sleep after years of anxiety. A woman from Brazil said she played the video every morning before work because it gave her strength. A child from Italy had drawn her picture beside a piano and sent it to the cafe owner. She sat on her couch watching it, tears streaming down her face. It was overwhelming to see how something so simple had touched so many. All she did was play, that was it. But maybe that was the point. Sometimes the smallest acts create the biggest waves. The next few weeks brought new opportunities. A local radio station invited her for an interview. At first she said no, too nervous to speak publicly. But after thinking about it, she agreed. The interviewer was kind, asking about her journey, her love for music, and what inspired her. She answered honestly, saying, "I just played because I missed it. I didn't expect anyone to listen." That honesty made the interview go viral too. People admired her humility and sincerity in a world full of noise and showmanship. After the interview, the producer reached out again. "The world already loves your music," he said. "Let's record something small, maybe just one song, one studio session. If you don't like it, we won't release it." She thought for a while and agreed. "Just one," she said, smiling nervously. The day she entered the recording studio, she felt her heart racing. Everything looked so professional. Big microphones, soundproof walls, people with headphones moving quietly. It was intimidating. But when she sat at the piano and placed her hands on the keys, all the fear melted away. She closed her eyes and played Awakening. When she finished, the room was silent. The sound engineer wiped his eyes and whispered, "That was beautiful." The producer looked at her with pride. "That," he said softly, "is what the world has been waiting for." The song was released online a week later under the simple title, The Unknown Pianist, Awakening. Within days, it reached millions of streams. Listeners wrote messages saying how it made them feel alive, how it helped them during hard times. One comment said, This feels like listening to someone's soul healing in real time. Another said, her music reminds me that it's okay to start over, no matter how late. For her, it wasn't about numbers or views. It was about knowing her music was finally doing what she always dreamed it would, touching hearts. The producer offered to create a full album, but she asked for time. I don't want to rush, she said. I want every note to mean something. During this time, she started teaching a few children in her neighborhood how to play. She didn't charge much, just enough to cover the cost of maintenance for her small piano. She loved watching their little fingers learn, their eyes lighting up when they got a tune right. One of her students, a shy girl with bright eyes, reminded her of herself at that age. The girl once asked, "Do you think I can be like you someday?" She smiled gently and said, "You already are. You're playing because you love it. That's all that matters." The days turned into weeks, and the story of the unknown pianist continued to spread. She started receiving letters from around the world, handwritten notes from people thanking her for her courage and her kindness. Some included photos, others shared personal stories. One man wrote that her music gave him hope after losing his job. Another said he played her song during his wedding because it represented new beginnings. She kept every letter in a box by her piano. Whenever she doubted herself, she opened it and read a few. It reminded her why she started playing again. Not for applause, not for fame, but for connection. One evening, the cafe owner called her. "You won't believe this," he said excitedly. "A famous orchestra from the city wants to collaborate with you for a special performance." She laughed softly, almost in disbelief. "Me with an orchestra?" He chuckled. "Why not? You've already captured the world with one piano. Imagine what you could do with 50. She didn't say yes immediately. She wanted to be sure she was doing it for the right reason, but after thinking for a few days, she agreed. Not for herself, but for the people who had supported her from the beginning. She wanted to give them something unforgettable. The concert was set to be held in a large hall, but she asked for something simple. No grand decorations, no fancy lights. She wanted the focus to be only on the music. The day arrived, and as she stood backstage, she felt that same nervous excitement she had felt in the cafe long ago. But this time she wasn't alone. Behind her stood the orchestra, tuning their instruments, ready to follow her lead. When she stepped onto the stage, the audience rose in applause. Cameras flashed, but she didn't notice. She walked straight to the piano and took a deep breath. The conductor gave a nod and the hall fell silent. Then the music began. The orchestra started softly, the strings blending beautifully with her piano. Together they created something powerful, a mix of her past and her present, her pain and her peace. It wasn't just a performance. It was a story, her story, told through every note. When the final note echoed through the hall, there was a pause, as if everyone was holding their breath. Then came the standing ovation. People clapped until their hands hurt. Some were crying, others just stood in silence, overwhelmed. Backstage, the producer hugged her. "You did it," he whispered. She smiled through tears. "No," she said softly. "We did it. Me, the cafe, the people, everyone who believed." That night, as she returned home, she placed her hand on her piano and whispered a quiet thank you. The same keys that once carried her sorrow now carried her strength. She had come a long way, from a small cafe corner to a stage filled with light, but deep down she knew this wasn't the end. It was only the middle of a much bigger melody, one that was still unfolding, note by note, heart by heart. After the orchestra concert, her life changed in ways she never expected. The world seemed to open its arms to her music, and yet she stayed the same, calm, humble, and grounded. Fame didn't interest her. What mattered to her was still the same thing that had always mattered, playing from her heart. A few days after the concert, she went back to her usual cafe. The owner was cleaning tables when he saw her walk in. His face brightened instantly. "Back to where it all began," he said, handing her her favorite cup of tea. She smiled and nodded. The sound of the old espresso machine, the quiet chatter, and the smell of fresh coffee. It all felt like home. She sat at the same piano that had once changed everything. She ran her fingers over the keys gently as if greeting an old friend. "Do you want to play something?" the owner asked. She smiled softly. "Not today. Today, I just want to listen." She sipped her tea and watched as a young boy approached the piano. He looked nervous, maybe 10 or 11 years old. His hand shook slightly and he glanced at her as if asking for permission. "Go ahead," she said kindly. "Play what you feel." He nodded and pressed a few uneven notes. The melody wasn't perfect, but it had heart. When he finished, she clapped quietly. "That was beautiful," she said. "Do you come here often?" The boy shook his head shyly. "No, but my father said this is the piano where the lady who makes people cry played." She laughed softly. "I'm not sure about that," she said. "But I think music is about making people feel, not cry." The boy nodded seriously, taking her words as if they were lessons from a teacher. After he left, she sat there for a long time, thinking about how much had changed. Once she had been that nervous person sitting at the piano, afraid to play in front of anyone. Now she was the one encouraging others to find courage. Life had a strange way of turning circles. The next few weeks were filled with letters and calls from people she had never met. Some invited her to perform abroad. Others wanted to collaborate. But she wasn't ready to rush into anything. She had learned that the best things came slowly, naturally, like a melody finding its way through silence. One morning, as she sat by her window, she got a letter that caught her attention. It wasn't from a company or an event planner. It was handwritten in simple ink, the envelope slightly creased. It was from an elderly man named George. He wrote that he lived in a small seaside town far from the city. He said his wife used to play piano before she passed away, and since then, the house had been quiet. But when he heard her song, Awakening, he said it felt like his wife had played for him again. At the end of the letter, he wrote, "If you ever find yourself near the sea, I'd be honored if you could visit. The piano is still here, waiting for someone to bring it to life again." She read the letter twice, then looked out at the horizon. For some reason, those words touched her deeply. Maybe because she understood what it felt like to lose music once, or maybe because she knew how much a simple melody could mean to someone lonely. Without thinking too much, she packed a small bag, left a note for her students, and took a bus to the seaside town. The journey was long, winding roads, tall trees, and finally the scent of salt in the air. When she arrived, the town looked peaceful, almost forgotten by time. The houses were old but charming, with paint peeling from the walls and flowers growing wild in front yards. She found the address easily, a small blue house near the shore. The sound of waves echoed faintly in the distance. When she knocked, the door opened slowly. A tall, thin man with silver hair and kind eyes appeared. "You came," he said softly, almost in disbelief. "I didn't think you would," she smiled. "I read your letter. I couldn't ignore it." He welcomed her inside. The house smelled of old wood and sea air. In the corner of the room stood a dusty piano, its cover slightly torn, keys yellowed with age. "That's her piano," he said quietly. "I haven't touched it since she passed." She walked closer and lifted the lid gently. The strings were rusty, but the keys still worked. She sat down and pressed one note, soft and trembling, but still alive. She turned to him and asked, "Would you like me to play?" He nodded, his eyes misty. So she began, not a sad song, but something gentle and full of memory. The sound filled the small house, mingling with the whisper of waves outside. The old man closed his eyes, and for a few minutes it was as if time had stopped. When she finished, he wiped a tear and smiled faintly. "You don't know what you just gave me," he said. "It feels like she's here again." She stayed a little longer, helping him clean the piano and sharing tea. Before leaving, he said, "Promise me you'll never stop playing. Some of us need your music more than you know." She promised, then walked back toward the shore. The sunset painted the sky in gold and orange, and she stood there for a long time, feeling peaceful. When she returned home, something inside her had changed. She realized her music wasn't just hers anymore. It belonged to everyone who listened, the lonely, the lost, the hopeful. Each person heard something different, something they needed. That thought humbled her. Over the next few months, she began a small project called The Traveling Piano. She didn't tell anyone famous or post much about it. She just traveled from town to town with her small keyboard, visiting schools, hospitals, and old community centers. She played for people who couldn't come to big concerts, for those who needed comfort the most. In one hospital, she played for a group of children who were sick but full of laughter. In another place, she played for old veterans who tapped their fingers to the rhythm, remembering their youth. Everywhere she went, she collected stories of love, loss, dreams, and healing. She kept them all in a small notebook, writing after every visit. Sometimes she wrote just a few lines, like the old woman who smiled after the last note, or the boy who said the music made him forget his pain for a minute. Those moments became her treasures. Her fame continued to grow quietly, but she didn't chase it. What she loved most were the real faces, the eyes that glowed when the music began. She once told a journalist who came to interview her, "I don't play for applause. I play because it keeps me alive." One evening, while she was teaching her students, one of them asked, "When did you start playing again?" She smiled and said, "When I realized silence hurt more than sound." The class went quiet, thinking about her words. She looked around at their eager faces and felt grateful. These young learners were the future of music, pure, unafraid, full of wonder. As months passed, she received another message from the producer who had first helped her. He said there was a global music festival happening soon, and they wanted her to perform as the closing act. "You don't need to say yes," he told her, "but it's a chance for your message to reach the world." She thought about it for days. It wasn't fear that held her back this time. It was the feeling that her place was with people, not on a grand stage. But then she remembered something the old man by the sea had said. "Some of us need your music more than you know." Maybe there were people out there, far away, who needed it too. So she agreed. The festival was held in a huge outdoor arena by the water. The crowd was massive, thousands of people from different countries holding lights and banners. The air was filled with anticipation. She sat backstage, calm but thoughtful. She wasn't there to impress anyone. She was there to connect, to remind everyone why music mattered. When her name was announced, the audience erupted in applause. She walked out slowly, dressed simply in white, her hair gently tied back. She sat at the piano under the open sky. The sea wind brushed her face as the lights dimmed. She looked at the stars for a moment before she began to play. The first notes were quiet, almost fragile, then grew stronger. She played Awakening, then moved into new melodies that spoke of hope, forgiveness, and love. The sound carried through the air like waves. Some people closed their eyes. Some held hands. Some simply stood still, letting the music wash over them. At one point, she stopped playing and spoke softly into the microphone. "Music saved me when I had nothing left. I hope tonight it reminds you that there's always something worth holding on to." Her voice trembled, not from fear but from emotion. Then she played one final piece, one she had written secretly, called Home. It was slow and full of peace, ending with a quiet note that seemed to linger forever. When the last sound faded, the audience was silent for a moment, then rose to their feet. The applause was thunderous, echoing against the sea. She bowed deeply, tears shining in her eyes. The moment didn't feel like victory. It felt like gratitude and like a circle finally closing. That night after the festival, she sat by the shore alone. The stars were bright and the waves whispered softly. The producer came and sat beside her. "You did something special tonight," he said quietly. "You reminded people what music really means." She smiled faintly. "Music is just another way to say we're not alone," she said. He nodded. "And you say it beautifully." The following months were peaceful. She continued her small travels, still teaching, still playing. But now, wherever she went, people recognized her. They called her the pianist who listens. And maybe that was true. She didn't just play for others. She listened to their hearts before touching the keys. Years passed like this, each one bringing new faces, new songs. She never sought fame, but her music became timeless, finding its way into homes and hearts all over the world. The old cafe where it all began remained her favorite place. She visited often, sitting at the same piano, smiling when people walked in and recognized her. Some would ask for a picture. Others just wanted to listen quietly. One afternoon, the young boy who had once played nervously in the cafe returned, now older and more confident. He sat beside her and said, "I've been practicing every day since that day. I think I finally understand what you meant, that music is about making people feel." She looked at him proudly. "Then you've already learned the most important part." He played for her, a melody both familiar and new. She listened, eyes closed, smiling. When he finished, she said softly, "You're ready now." He looked confused. "Ready for what?" She laughed gently. "To make someone else believe in themselves just like you once believed in me." As the years went on, her health began to fade. But even then, she never stopped playing. Her hands grew slower, but the emotion never left. In her last performance, held quietly at the cafe for close friends and students, she said, "If one day you hear a song that feels like sunlight, that's me saying hello." When she finally left the world, she did so peacefully in her sleep, with her piano by her side. The cafe owner kept her piano untouched, with a small note placed on it. "This piano belongs to everyone who listens." And people did. Every day someone new would come, sit and play. Sometimes it was a student, sometimes a stranger passing through town, but every time the sound that filled the cafe carried the same warmth. The spirit of a woman who taught the world that music isn't about fame or perfection, but about feeling alive. Her story became legend, told in whispers and songs. Some said her music could still be heard on quiet nights mixed with the wind by the sea. Others said her melody lived in every heart that ever found comfort in sound. Maybe both were true, because in the end, her story wasn't about loss or success. It was about courage. The courage to start again, to share, to heal. And somewhere in every note ever played after her, a part of her still lives on, softly reminding the world that even the quietest songs can echo forever.